Hi, welcome to the Mindrolling webcast by a couple of mind rollers. We're going to keep trying to define what the hell we're talking about, but we'll get it. And it's certainly moving from one thing to another. Is that nature? Then we surely are that. Well, we've been talking about our experiences from the 60s into the turn of the decade, into the early 70s, and where we were at, and all of our influences and transforming experiences, acid, the whole music of the time, the whole 9 yards. But something did happen in the late 60s, because I remember you telling me at one point. We'll talk about Frank Zappa.
Oh, Frank Zappa, yeah. Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention used to come to Boston more than they came to most places. I don't know why. Of course, they came from, California. But I got to know Frank because I had the TV show, Counterculture, and he happened to see it. So when we called him up at the Holiday Inn on Beacon Street, he said he would do my show. So we did an interview with him. I did an interview with him. I was really excited about it because there was nothing quite like the Mothers. They were just disruptive and talk about changing your consciousness. They were madmen, but very skillful, brilliant musicians, actually. So Frank agreed to do my show, one-to-one interview. And it was 68, and it was the time when, the Beatles and the Stones, the whole British thing was still kind of predominating. Except for, Buffalo Springfield, the Byrds, those kind of things. So he came out into the studio. We did it in this huge Studio B at WGBH, a really vast studio with just two chairs looking at each other. And at that time, I didn't know him. It was very intimidating. And he sat down and I sat down. And before the thing started, I just said, "Hello, Frank, good to meet you." It was really like that. Hello. It was very gloomy. And then I introduced my show. I said, "This is what's happening. Silver, this is David Silver. I'm really honored to have Frank Zappa here." And he goes, "Oh, you're British?" I said, "Well, yes," quite timidly. And he said, "So do you like the Beatles?" "Well, what are you going to say to a question like that in 1968? And I said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "I fucking hate the Beatles, okay?"
Oh,
with that look on his face, I said, "Well, I'm sorry." So the conversation started off in this very contentious manner. And by the way, he was pretty serious because he was basically saying, "What is this? We've got great musicians. I mean, me and Captain Beefheart and Commander Cody and the Byrds and everything. Just in California, we're acing it. What's this about Liverpool?" He was really quite hurt by the fact that the British, and when he found out that I was British, he thought he'd take it out on me. It so happened it developed into a real friendship. And every time Frank came to Boston, we used to have dinner. An interesting thing about the 60s and 70s is you could never really predict what anything was about. Frank was a strict anti-drug person. The most way-out musician you could imagine. Not only was he against drugs, but if anybody did in his band, he would fire them instantaneously.
I remember. Yeah.
And the times I spent with him were all about Stockhausen and Stravinsky. He was such a musicologist,
We used to play Beefheart all the time.
Oh, Beefheart was the greatest. Yeah. If you're out there and you haven't actually listened to something of Beefheart, it's not music from the past. It's music from the future.
No, it's the weirdest music I ever heard
but
by
it's
far,
great.
and still did something to you.
Absolutely. The music of that time was so interesting because you had that British thing, then you had that Southern and Northern California thing, and the Detroit thing happening very heavily. So soul music and British invasion music and California sort of drug music all was moving at the same time. Otis Redding was just as likely to be played on FM radio as Neil Young or the Zombies. It was all mixed together, and that's when FM radio really was great.
I had a bad experience at the radio station back then.
With yours in Montreal?
In Montreal, yeah. Oh, terrible experience with unfortunately a member of your country.
Oh, what happened?
British.
Should people hear? Is this going to be good?
Yeah, This
is the anecdote show. We're doing anecdotes shamelessly.
Led Zeppelin. Oh, your friends. They came to Montreal and did a big concert, and we were on the air. I actually had hired my brother, who was a fanatic R&B fan. That's all he played or listened to, Otis and all, right? So we went to see Led Zeppelin, and we absolutely hated it, both of us. Like we were, running into how could anybody, there's Hendrix, there's Mike Bloomfield. I mean, there's like incredible blues. I mean, this was what? This kind of, anyhow. I actually, when I listen now, I go, wow, that sounds great.
No,
I like it now way better than I did
were
then.
pretty
And,
amazing.
but unfortunately, my brother had a show, and he said, I was at this Zeppelin concert last night at the Forum. It was the worst shit. So happened that Jimmy Page happened to be riding in his car in Montreal because they were staying over to do a television show. And he heard this because it was the only major rock and roll station there. And he heard my brother do this.
Oh.
He flipped out. I mean, completely went mad. And I had to go and denounce them when they went on this television pop, Dick Clark knockoff kind of show in Montreal, and denounced my brother and the radio station.
It just goes to show you can't be in any media and think that no one's listening.
Yeah, right. No,
You know what I
never
mean?
do that. Never. Anyhow, I had to go to Robert Plant's hotel room. And he actually was staying in an apartment. They had rented an apartment. And Jimmy wasn't there. I guess he was so pissed. And I had to go, and with another DJ from England, who they knew him and he knew them, and he was a huge fan. He got, he was just playing them left and right. Yeah. I had to go apologize.
I mean, seriously, formally on the radio, I have to say you were sorry.
No,
too.
I formally went to the apartment to him personally and apologized. Of course, we apologized on air for that bro of mine's air.
What was he thinking? Well, I guess he was just being
thinking
honest.
wasn't part of what was going on for us then. Which brings up other subjects about thinking wasn't very part of our wasn't very much part of our lexicon then, wasn't it?
Thinking?
Thinking.
No, because everything that was moving us towards saying everything is overthought, everything's on the intellectual level. That's why we're in the trouble we're in. Let go, turn on, tune in, drop out, run away, whatever. But it wasn't thinking in the old-fashioned sense, because I think a lot of us felt that a much more visceral and heartfelt response to your life was going to make you happier than all that.
Seemed to do a lot of not very bright things back then, though.
Oh, you mean? Oh, you're not being. You're saying we were just clueless.
Yeah, we were clueless.
Thoughtless,
at times,
selfish.
Yeah, some of that was going on. Fortunately, by the turn of that decade, I mean, you and I happened to be again. We were very lucky to have these beings come into our lives and help change. I mean. Which reminds me, this is way jumping on this thing.
But this is all mind rolling.
Yeah,
or mind rolling.
Mind rolling, yeah, by the mind rollers. When I went to India and I lived with Neem Karoli Baba, at one point, now we're talking about a powerful change. Like I say, we were going through this transformative change, where we were stopping being too stupid, selfish, self-centered, and so on, because we were actually starting to think there was a way to live what we learned on these acid trips, right? Anyhow, at one moment, my dad decided to come on over. He wanted to see how we're doing. Bottom line is, Maharaji, who Ram Dass had given LSD to twice, nothing happened, said to me, "Did you give him the medicine when he got there?" I mean, you're talking about an entrepreneurial businessman. He might have smoked a joint by then. Anyhow, he told me to take care of him while he was in India. Get him some acid. If you can believe that, being said by this, this being. And
That was his idea?
He said to me, give him the medicine take care of him. Give him that medicine.
Oh.
My father was a tyrannical egomaniac. Okay?
Yes.
So, and I've described this in other places in detail, but suffice to say, he had a death trip in Benares where people go to die by the Ganges River, and his life after that was never the same, and we were able to become friends. Yeah. So this happened in those early 70s. Talk about his life absolutely categorically changed. He was a bomber pilot in the Second World War, and he thought he wasn't afraid to die because he was the only one who lived in his squadron at the end of the war. And so talk about transformation and the power of that energy. And so you have, in one sense, the era that we were in, and how so many things lent itself to this transformation. And then of course, we talked about these beings, and we talked about them out of not necessarily needing to be in a body to relate with that which is, no different than who you are inside. That's intellectual, but that is the truth. And these transformations really happen, and I guess that's...
The thing is, they were negativized, though, because what people would say were, very uptight about this. People have acid flashes, and well, yeah, but it wasn't flashes; it was all the time. Because once you did that in the right way, your entire life was. Yeah, you still made mistakes and still had problems on a more trivial level, but there was something that crept in that never went away, and that to me was. And I think Ramdas has said this on numerous occasions, which is when he's been asked, which people ask him all the time, even now, do you regret having been, doing psychedelics and talking about them and everything? And he always says, no, it was the doorway that helped me, leave the unsatisfactory life and behavior that I was doing. And so, but, he always says, you have to be very not thoughtful, it's fastidious about the way you take them and all of that. Your father, I'm interested to know, because that wasn't normal. I didn't know one other person whose father or mother, anybody out of the generation, who had the, cojones to take this. When he took it, he took it. What was the transformation like? How long did it take him before he threw away his old ego identity?
We were horrible. My brother and I,
Yeah.
and my partner who was my wife-to-be, we gave it to him, and we were on a houseboat on the Ganges that was swaying back and forth, the river and the mist and the whole 9 yards. People all along that bank is people washing, praying, doing their laundry, dying, being born, being christened, cows, dogs, everybody's there. The whole and then dolphins in the actual river.
There were dolphins in the river?
River dolphins.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, in the Ganges. Yeah, you see them.
Goodness.
And hopefully these bodies, there's enough money for enough wood so that the bodies completely burn, because when they don't, the dolphins eat the remaining, and dogs and everybody. So, yeah, this is the scene. Can you imagine that? Yeah, old Dad's taking acid on the roof of this houseboat, looking over the river, and we are sitting around watching him with our eyes like, going, how you doing? Anything happening yet? That kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
So we were terrible, and then he was like reading. I remember he started the trip by reading, and he got all into what he was reading at the time. And then that stopped, and he was just sort of... We felt like, okay, maybe he needs to walk, right? So we took him off the boat and started walking through the alleys of Benares. Now, they're these tiny, you're talking centuries and centuries and centuries. It's like going back, tiny alleys with people living in temples and products being sold and saris, and it's just, you go through different, Muslim neighborhood, and then Hindu neighborhood. Oops, they're not, I've been in riots in Benares where I had to hide out. It's a charged place because of all that. Yeah. And we took them through there. The first thing we came upon was a dead donkey, God. And then it just died. And then a dead man, and his body was there, and people were passing by and throwing coins on it. He's obviously very poor. And the idea, I guess somebody was there, I don't know who was, maybe it was a relative, was taking care, and they were trying to collect enough money to properly burn the body. So he came upon that. So it's all death. He had a big-time death trip. That's what he needed, It was unbelievable. And after that, I've never seen such a market change that lasted beyond the time that he had the trip. I mean, it totally rewired him, and then, he went back, and before he went back to America, he saw Maharaji again, and who told him everything about his life. He had a farm and animals and what happened to, stuff that nobody could know, and he broke down, and and that was the beginning of the end for him. He actually came back 6 months later. After we had come back to Canada from India, he went back a few months later after us and spent a couple of months there with my sister and so on. He took my, my whole family basically. So he was absolutely transformed in that moment, and that stayed. I very miraculous, especially if you had known my relationship and so on.
No, because by the time I knew him and quite a few other people, he is very, he was affable, but tremendously to the point, and very, if you asked him a question or he was very forthcoming. There wasn't the slightest bit of tightness. And very wise. Everybody, I think, acknowledges that if he just put his mind to it, he could solve a problem for you. He certainly did with me. So it stuck.
Yeah.
Forever.
Yeah, no, that whatever, certainly, because you met him after that. Now, around this time, some of these beings from India, some were teachers, some were called gurus, some were swamis, and so on. They were coming, and they were spending time in the States, and many people were being, magnetized, basically. Some were fairly righteous, some were not, maybe, and taking advantage. And for the most part, were teachers. I don't know of a being like Ananda Mahima, Neem Karoli, Baba Shirdi Sai, that kind of a being that was there. But do you have some recollection? Because that's also formative when these beings started to come over.
Swami Muktananda was one of those. And because I knew that he was revered by people that I liked, loved even, I had darshan with him, which consisted of... What actually happened was I gave a lecture somewhere, and after the lecture, two guys came up to me very sort of formally and said, "We listened to the lecture." And my lectures at that time were about LSD. They were about, how to use it and what the fourth dimension in LSD, I think is what it was called. Anyway, they were there, and they said, we want you to meet our Baba, and he's going to be on the Upper West Side in Manhattan in 3 weeks. And I went. And there were about only 30 people in a small room, and we chanted and meditated. He didn't speak. He didn't say a word. Now, for those of you who might not know, Muktananda looked more like Miles Davis, and he had dark glasses and was extremely cool looking, But what people used to talk about with him was this thing called Shaktipat, that he would maybe tap you on the head or smack you on the head or do something, and you would have this sudden onrush of Shakti or divine energy and feel completely transformed and so on. So that was the kind of thing that was floating around, and I knew about it. So I was kind of excited to go. Interestingly enough, nothing happened to me that seemed any different from any other experience, even at the supermarket or watching TV. Absolutely nothing. So what do you do with that? I didn't feel good about actually telling people this, because it sounded like I was automatically saying, that's all nonsense. There's no transference of energy, none of it. I knew that I got to know by that time that if it wasn't the exact right teacher with the exact right student, you might as well, you didn't see or feel anything. But at the same time, you couldn't then dismiss them, because you had to be open to the karmic fact or that maybe they're just not for you.
Yeah, and that's so much of how it is and how everything is. I mean, what happens to you in life even, once you see that, you see it's perfect for unraveling what's needed for you to unravel.
Yeah, because you see people with Satchidananda, particularly in New York, at the Integral Yoga, and I was present with him a few times, and people were just over the top when they were with him. I mean, they'd just be, and I thought he was amazing to look at, and definitely, had knowledge, and was a very beautiful being. I didn't know anything else, though. I couldn't feel, I wasn't able to gain anything from it. And that's another part of that era, which there was sort of no grounding for anything. It was like catch as catch can. You hear about a teacher, a guru, you go. It wasn't as if there was a yoga journal not really, not till later. New Age journal came at the end of the 70s, I think.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Anyway, enough said.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is very much what started to happen, where more and more of these beings came over, and that started to affect a segment of the culture, one might say. I mean, today, you can't, you can't, wherever you go, you can shake a stick, so to speak, and you can have access to almost any of these traditions from the East, from Tibet, it's just amazing. But back then, every time somebody came over, it was kind of a unique thing, and it gathered us together, and that started to create Western satsangs. And, certainly, for instance, there's one, and I have to mention this for people to check out, because, again, I'm going to refer to my friend Duncan, and he is always saying, yeah, if you think of someone, I want to read that book, or I want to, and here's one of the things that came back from the East that we were very close to, people that had gone over to see Maharaji, was insight meditation practice, which was really, it's Hinayana Buddhism, and this particular practice was in Burma, was developed in Burma, and was very strong there, and teachers came out of there. There was one Indian teacher in particular named Goenka that many of us met, and Munindra was another, and some people came out of that tradition, 3 particular people, and started 2 major centers on the east and west coasts. Sharon Salzberg, Joseph Goldstein, and Jack Kornfield. And here's my recommendation, folks, these people are absolutely, if you get a chance to be at any of their retreats or whatever, even a talk, I know Sharon gives talks in New York, please take advantage. I mean, some of the most straightforward, practical ways to deal with the unraveling, so to speak, and certainly deal with mind, emotions, and all that stuff, and gain true insight. I mean, it's a practice that I think I understood that His Holiness the Dalai Lama actually had given instructions to have novice monks use that as a basis, which is unusual. But bottom line is, that's a high recommendation. So some of this stuff that came back from the East started to be really a major contribution to the culture and mixed in. Buddhism now is very much a West, the Buddhism that's here is really being, it's not westernized, but it's being integrated into the Western psychology and dealing with, it's particularly the scientific elements. His Holiness is working with people like Danny Goleman, who's one of the group that went to India to see Maharaji, and working on these kind of investigations that I think are really super and bring a lot more people get more people involved, which is a great thing. But so this started to happen in those days, and we basically took a big advantage of it. And I guess our next intersection here is around kind of when we came back from India. And of course, there's a huge story there of all of us going there. Probably the most interesting to people is that a number of these people, Danny Goleman being one of them, Krishna Das being another, who's chants around the world and is really doing it in the way that we were given in India. I mean, he's really, and Jai Uttal as well. So people from different walks have made different contributions from the East that are very present now in the West. So, that's certainly a part of what happened when that disbursement happened. And of course, Ram Dass is the biggest example with Be Here Now, because it affected millions of people, literally. and goes on to this day, which another subject we'll take up later. But what are your ideas and recollections of this starting to pull together different satsangs, different communities, spiritual communities, and how they were interfacing with each other and so on and so forth? And
it still seemed a little bit sort of, random. For me it was. Because I know that Trungpa was
major. That's a major influence, absolutely.
I mean, and you can only really
read up him, by the way. Trungpa Rinpoche.
Yeah.
Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche.
Or
Meditation in Action.
Yeah, pretty much any of the books in his Shambhala publications came originally out of Trungpa and Naropa, I guess. But again, there was nothing institutionalized or in any way regimented about this. I don't know how I came into contact with Trungpa. I have no idea. I don't remember. But I know that every time he came to Boston, I would do anything to see him. And then I would go to Vermont because he had a place a Tail of the Tiger in Vermont and one in Colorado, I suppose. So I would, drive up to this little village in Vermont, and he would take over a little church there and talk and drink a lot of sake. I didn't know.
We were there. So did you know Ram Dass then? This is because when we used to go there, it was because it was when we came back from India. I used to meet Ram Dass up at Tail of the Tiger in 1973.
It was a little after that.
Oh, so you came after that.
Definitely.
Yeah. Right.
It was a little after that. But I do remember this, that going up there and hearing him talk and the way he used humor and Americanisms and American culture, even whatever he picked up within this amazing, the word amazing doesn't cover it. He was a master.
Absolutely.
But he would, was dressed in a Harris tweed jacket and slacks and a nice tie and very well kempt and everything. But he was just as authentic as it could be. And it was really gratifying to see how many people were drawn to him. Without any conflict, really, with anything else. It wasn't like people who were following the works of Ram Dass or even older back, Alan Watts and Paul Reps and all that other tradition of...
Well, Alan was very close to him, And, at that time...
Right.
And?
Well, Ginsberg was very... That's when he started his Buddhist practice, I think.
Yeah, it was definitely through that. So that's a big marker. It's funny that we have these...
it is. I didn't know that.
We didn't really talk about that over all these years, so it's interesting how we jump in and out of
I
these
can't
things.
even honestly do it justice as to what I felt when I was at a Trungpa talk. And they were interactive to some extent. There were certainly questions.
He used to make fun of us. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, we'd be in the audience. We, meaning Ram Dass, being the personality that Trungpa, would jive. He'd start talking about and people, that are on this, they go to the East and they bring this back as if they've, just become enlightened, and suddenly everything is love and light. And he'd go, right, Ram Dass?
Oh.
He was constantly jiving.
No, he was a real trickster.
Well, and of course there was many things about him that were, shall we say, not really understandable by virtue of the level of being he was in terms of the duality of the stuff he was involved with sex stuff and all that. But that's neither here nor there. He was, and to this day remains, an important teacher in the whole pantheon of these people who have come from the East. So, again, we took advantage of this stuff. We really did at the time. We really took advantage, and that became more and more of our focal point. Earning the grub, as Tiwari told that story.
The grub.
Yeah, that's right. Earning your rotis, as they put it in India, was certainly part of the equation. But there was a way in which we wanted a balance. I didn't personally... I was in the radio business. After I got back from India, I worked for the Canadian Broadcasting Corp and did, programming for them. But it wasn't front and center anymore for me. Front and center was really developing more of, an identification with soul rather than role, as Ram Dass says so much. I mean, that's really a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Now, that is a whole other discussion. From moving from the roles that we find ourselves in, and all sorts of roles. It doesn't have to be just your job, and moving into soul. I think that we would have to say is that this was primary to the arc of our lives. If you could say anything about what it is, we went from point A to B to C to D as we went through all of these things that we've been, talking about here from the late 60s into the turn of that decade. It really was, the development of identification with who we really are. And how much of that was happening at any given time maybe was, a little microscopic. But as time has gone on, certainly there is absolutely an evolution. And I guess that's one thing we can offer up. But we'll talk about that next time.
Okay.
We're mind rollers.